Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Part 3 of the SAP on Azure Webinar Series, running SAP in the public cloud, driving business and IT transformation with Microsoft Azure. Today's event is entitled SAP Customers' Perspectives on Moving SAP Systems to the Cloud, hosted by SAP Insider and presented by Microsoft. My name is Steve Paul. I'm your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive between you and our presenters, and later in the program we'll ask for your feedback. This webinar also contains audience polling, so please complete the polls when they appear, and thanks for your participation. You can participate in our Q&A session by asking questions about the information presented in this webinar at any time. Just type your question into the Q&A text box located below the speaker bios on the left, and then click the Submit button. We'll answer as many questions as time permits after our presentation. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event, and you can download a PDF copy of the presentation by clicking in the resource box in the bottom left of our console. And at this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit our webinar help guide by clicking on the Help question mark icon on the bottom right of our console. And if slides are not advancing, please press the F5 key on your keyboard to refresh your browser. Now on to our presentation, SAP Customers' Perspectives on Moving SAP Systems to the Cloud. Speaking today will be Mark Skaug, Worldwide Director of SAP with Microsoft, and we also have Mike Taylor, GM Enterprise Application Services with Microsoft. First, we'll hear from Mark.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today. This is the third in a three-part webinar series on running SAP in the public cloud. Today's webinar focuses on SAP customer perspectives on moving SAP systems to the cloud. As Steve mentioned, my name is Mark Skaug, and I'm the Worldwide Director of SAP here at Microsoft. Joining me today is Mike Taylor. Mike is the General Manager of Enterprise Application Services for Microsoft. Our agenda for today includes Mike starting off by giving us an in-depth story on how Microsoft migrated its SAP landscapes to Azure and the lessons learned along the way. I will then talk through a couple other customer case studies and highlight the key learnings. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions for us today, and we'll be happy to take them at the end of the webinar today. I'm going to start off with a poll slide. Steve, can you walk us through that process?
Sure, very well. Thank you, Mark. We have a couple of poll questions. Our first one here, I just want to know what is your organization planning a migration to the cloud? Are you planning that in less than 12 months, more than 12 months? Maybe you have no plans to move to S/4HANA, or you don't know. And so please provide your responses here. We're going to share the results in a few moments, and then we'll go on with our presentation. And just a reminder again, we are going to take questions at the conclusion of the webinar. So get them in early and often, and we'll take them at the conclusion. Okay, all right, looks like we're getting a very good response here. Mark, would you like to see the results?
Yes, Steve, that would be great.
Okay, excellent. All right. Again, thanks for your participation. Our audience happens to say that, well, about a little over a third don't know, but a quarter do, and a quarter say less than 12 months, and a quarter say more than 12 months. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so this is pretty common to what we see from customers. Every year we see an increase in the amount of movement that's happening. Even at Microsoft, if you think about our journey, we started way early. Mike's going to talk about it. But, you know, the evolution is accelerating like it is with most customers. So for me, if I queried everyone about 2 years ago, you probably would have seen much smaller numbers for the less than 12 months. And even on the more than 12 months, you probably would have seen more customers in the unsure category on that. And so in this case, again, we're seeing not just an acceleration of the hyperscale cloud, Azure in this case, but you're also seeing an evolution where people are moving for S4. And part of the reason behind that, obviously, is SAP sunsetting its support for the NetWeaver environments, the traditional NEDB environments by 2025. So I expect if I was asking this question next year, the numbers would be closer to 50% based on growth of less than 12 months movement to the cloud. So we're going to see, again, how that goes after some time here. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike to go through a couple of questions about our Microsoft experience. And so I think the move to the cloud for Azure was really important to us. And Mike, I get this question a lot. Do we really run SAP at Microsoft?
Yes, absolutely we do. And so I'm happy to be here and happy to talk to everyone about that journey. That is definitely the number one question we get as well, and we are 100% of our SAP landscape is on the cloud. Let me just step back and kind of educate everyone on kind of my role within the company so you can understand kind of what I'm responsible for, and then I'll walk the folks through that journey. And so I actually am in Core Services Engineering and Operations Group that reports up to Kurt Delbany, who's our Executive Vice President. And we really rebranded kind of IT as we know it. Kurt's group, or CSEO, is actually in charge of moving Microsoft internally through the digital transformation as we know it, and really kind of trying to migrate all of our internal processes and procedures through this digital transformation. And so, this group really is made up of IT, operations, and our strategy office for the corporation. And so really we come together and look at all of our processes and procedures and think about how we really need to kind of transition and move into the digital age. And so SAP and my accountability here at Microsoft is to manage our SAP environment. And so that is one of the main focus areas. And so one of the first objectives was looking at our SAP landscape and saying, we really should be looking at moving this to the cloud and leveraging some of those strong benefits around cost savings, agility, and reliability. And so I'm happy to kind of walk the folks through this journey that we've been on, moving our SAP instance to the cloud. So just to give context, because whenever I speak to customers and other peers of mine throughout the industry, everyone always wants to kind of understand the SAP landscape here at Microsoft and kind of the size and scope that we're talking about. So this is more of a kind of a business view. We do have a very application view of this across the board, but this kind of lays out all of the businesses we support. Anywhere from HR, finance, to our supply chain business. Commerce is kind of our licensing business, either with consumption-based licensing or enterprise agreements or OEM. And then we also actually are moving our professional services, enterprise services, onto SAP. And then to support that, obviously, we kind of have the SAP platform activities that support all of those landscapes. And so this is kind of our overall landscape. We also have 4 SAP SaaS solutions that we interact with as well, SuccessFactors, Ariba, IBP, and Concur. And so that kind of gives you just the generic landscape. The other most interesting slide for customers is to kind of understand the size and scope, is this is kind of our landscape by numbers. And so if you think of how big and how large our instance is, we actually have a single SAP instance here at Microsoft that runs our business. It's all on SQL Server, and it's about 50 terabytes uncompressed. Highly compressed, we're about 16 terabytes. And so relatively, large landscape. And all of that, Mark, to your question, definitely, all of that is now 100% in the cloud, in Azure. And so we just finished that migration, I would say, in February this last year, and it kind of moved the final piece of it into the cloud. So if we kind of step back and say, well, why did we move and why was this important for us? One of the things that we kind of looked at were, 3 key components. Number one, cost. We actually benefit if we save, money on hardware sizing, right? And so in a physical world, we would size to the life of the hardware. And so, if we have 3 years out of depreciation, we would size to 3 years out, and we would never leverage all of that hardware. We would always underutilize it, and so it was a cultural shift. It was kind of a mentality of let's, ask for the largest set of servers. And so moving to Azure gave us a great opportunity to really save money and right-size the environments. Instead of planning for 6 months or 5, 6 years out or 3 years out, we could kind of ratchet that into 6 months and then actually save money through this whole process. The other piece that was very, very interesting to us was kind of the agility. And as we think of spinning up new businesses, testing out new upgrades, testing out new support packs, we could easily spin up different instances of our environment to test things out on the side, which was always very, very challenging in our existing landscape. And then reliability. We actually saw much higher reliability numbers as we moved to Azure and through this whole journey. So there was just a lot of benefits that we saw in moving this landscape to Azure. So if we kind of delve down deeper into kind of how we went about doing this, the very first thing we did was kind of assess kind of the candidates and the size of systems that we would need. And so the basis team kind of went through a whole bunch of analysis and evaluation and working with kind of the Azure product team to understand what SKUs we would need in that environment. We also obviously looked at, kind of our landscape of sandbox and unit test systems and dev systems just to kind of get an assessment of what things could go and when we should move to Azure. And then obviously we were working with the product teams kind of towards the longer path, getting the much larger M-series SKUs given the size of our landscape and the need to be on a much larger set of SKUs eventually as we migrate to Azure.
Mike, can you give us a little more detail on how that migration looked?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe this is a better picture kind of to show our landscape and set of servers, across the board. So, as we look at our landscape, you kind of see the set of systems across the top, right? Anywhere from ERP, which is our main ECC instance, to GTS, which is your trade instance. And so folks will see this and look at this and, kind of understand our set of servers. And then on the left-hand side, we have production all the way down to our sandbox systems. And so what the team did was they, after we kind of tested out Azure just with a few small systems, just to understand how that would look, how that would work, then we kind of took a horizontal and a vertical strategy. And so, what we did was we said, okay, we're going to take all of Sandbox and we're going to migrate all of the Sandbox systems to Azure. So that's kind of a horizontal strategy. It's easier, it's low risk, we can move a bunch of servers, we can understand how it's going to work, we can start working on automation scripts and things like that. And then what we did is we also took a vertical slice of our system. So, for this example, we actually took one of our OER systems that handles returns for our supply chain business. And we took our Duet system as well. And, during low periods of business time, and we moved those systems from production all the way down to Sandbox to Azure as well. So not only do we kind of learn from the horizontal of moving all of our landscapes, all of our Sandbox systems to Azure, but then from production all the way down to Sandbox, we could learn different aspects of how are things going to run in production, how are things going to run in UAT, how am I going to move code between the environments. And so it kind of gave us that, complete stack view for these low, impactful systems from production all the way down to Sandbox. And so that horizontal strategy and vertical strategy really helped us get a much better sense of what we were getting into. It also helped us with really building out a lot of automation so that we could do this, push of a button versus a lot of manual work. It really helped us, get a better sense of what this will take as we migrate the larger set of systems over. Okay, and then I'll make one other. Oh, yep, it's coming up in a future slides, so I'll wait for 1 second. The other thing is we needed to also make sure that we had high availability in the systems, and so the team also looked through that whole landscape, making sure we have all the best practices that we've always been using in our disaster recovery landscape. And so this is something that was always part of our focus too. This, I talked about this horizontal vertical strategy. This helped out with the horizontal vertical strategy. If you just move horizontal, if I just move my sandbox environments, then I'm also not learning how I'm going to kind of set up the disaster recovery instance for our production. So it really was helpful to do that horizontal and vertical strategy so that we could make sure we're building out and keeping our high availability and disaster recovery system before I get to kind of the major ECC systems that we had. So, Mark, you talked about this a bit about kind of the migration we've had, and we've been doing this for a little bit. When you look at this slide, when I show people this slide, at first I always kind of shudder and worry because I think, oh my gosh, it looks like it took us from 2013 until 2018 to move to Azure. When in truth, for the first year, we were really just partnering with the product team to see what works, what doesn't work, giving feedback and testing things out. Tons of different tests to make sure that it was ready for prime time, and we had the support and the pieces needed to kind of migrate. In the 2014 to 2016 timeframe, we really started to kind of invoke the let's move the sandbox systems, let's start moving the vertical, the kind of that horizontal and vertical strategy, so that we could learn and kind of make this migration. I get asked this all the time. Well, when you really started, how long did this take you, and what do you see other customers going through this whole process? Well, when we finally got started, it took us about a year, and you can kind of see that final year of really a big sharp spike up. We actually had planned a little over a year. We actually had originally planned, if you kind of look at the slides a little bit, we actually planned to go live in the August timeframe originally of 2018, and so to give us a little more time. But through the automation testing, automation scripts and all of the testing, we actually kind of moved it in. And so really that final year, from about February 2017 to February 18, we kind of made that decision of we're going to fully move to Azure. Azure's ready for prime time. This will allow us to reduce costs, improve our reliability, and help us with this agility, especially given the fact that we have so much business moving to our SAP instance. We have S4 on the horizon. We really needed the ability to kind of build real time. And so, that automation helped us, and it really gave us the confidence to move quickly to Azure once we felt committed.
I think that's great, Mike. That really has helped a lot of the other customers from a perspective of, us migrating first and looking at the automation and the things that can be done, and also the size of the systems growing. With SAP now in Azure, what's next from a technology standpoint? I mean, what tools can be utilized?
Yeah, and so it's a super exciting time, kind of with the tools, and boy, we see all of Satya's announcements this week even. One of the very first things that we're doing now that we're in Azure is aggressively right-sizing the systems. Now, I mentioned we did this to begin with, but even more so now that we're fully in Azure, right-sizing the systems and building to what you need is almost even less of a technology hurdle as a cultural hurdle. Our desire is to kind of grab everything that we need and just prepare for the future. Now that we've gone through this journey, culturally the team is recognizing the fact we can build up quickly, we can grow, we can scale out. So let's really right-size and let's snooze. Let's, sleep the systems that aren't needed over the weekend or in the lulls. to really start saving money. And how do we do that in an automated way? How do we do that quickly and easily? And so we're starting to work with the product team on how do we kind of build out that snooze capability even more so than it is today, so that we can start really optimizing our costs. The other amazing thing that we have in front of us is just the tools that Azure offers us now. Number one, leveraging the Azure Data Lake and, putting stuff into one place and having people do compute there instead of copying it 6 different places to do processing. We're working with each of the businesses to kind of dump out data as needed so that we can actually leverage that in Power BI to actually run analytics off of the data that we have. The other thing that we're starting to really invest and partner with the finance product team, as well as just even our own support organization, is AI, and how do we leverage AI against some of this data? Even as simple as how we think about categorizing logs and where we see, issues from a support perspective in the future, to financial reconciliation across different aspects. There's a bunch of stuff around machine learning, AI, bots that we want to start leveraging. Again, I mentioned at the very beginning this, our new organization, CSEO, part of our effort and part of our charter is transforming, moving Microsoft to the digital transformation, looking at our processes, automating how we do things. And so now that we're in this environment, the world opens up to all these different possibilities. And so this is something that, excites us and opens the door to a lot of different options as we move forward.
I think that's great, and it's similar to that concept that we're hearing from a lot of customers. I tell you, as a customer, I don't know if I want to go and talk to Microsoft about the move, because you were running so well for so many years on SAP that the bar was really high to start with. What did you notice when you went live and the post go live, the benefits that were there, and what are the best practices really around what happened?
Yeah, it's and I should have mentioned before, and thanks for mentioning that too, Mark. We've been running SAP for 25 years on Microsoft technologies, and there's been a tight partnership between not only our product teams but SAP. And so our customers are demanding, and expectations are high, and outages aren't acceptable. And so there is that kind of always that strong demand to make sure that things are solid. And so I think, here are some best practices we went through to make sure that we did not disrupt the environment and we kind of learned from it. Number one, and this is probably an obvious one for most of the folks on the phone, you move SAP systems completely together, right? Database, app servers, all together, when we're looking at a specific system. And so, that one's I think a pretty obvious one, but definitely an important one. The other thing that, the other piece that we learned as we went through this, was really looking at the latency between the systems and making sure we understand what systems need to work together. I'll give you an example. When we create an order, we make a call to our global trade system to screen against table of denied party and make sure we can sell that to that customer. Then we actually check our SCM system to make sure that we actually have inventory to fulfill that order. So there's 2 or 3 systems from SCM to GTS to ECC that have a lot of calls back and forth as we're processing. So through the analysis, we said those 3 systems are part of a single move group. We can't move one without the other because we wanted to be careful about latency. So we actually, when you saw that kind of that massive kind of box chart that I showed earlier, we actually had move groups within that box chart, so that we would, move group A, then move group B, and move group C to make sure that we were mindful of latency. The other thing is understand systems outside of SAP and how they interact with SAP. And so that ended up being a coordination effort across our enterprise to make sure everyone understood SAP's plan to move to the cloud and make sure that upstream and downstream systems coordinated with SAP in that space. Determining our Azure region strategy was essential too, especially as we talk about the different, upstream and downstream systems. So we're in US West 2 and US East 2, and for kind of our production and disaster recovery, making sure everyone is fully aware of that plan. Another item was making sure that bolt-on systems were Azure certified. And if it's a smaller bolt-on system that we needed to kind of deal with, then make sure that we tested thoroughly. And it wasn't certified and it wasn't planning to be certified at the time, make sure we tested thoroughly through that whole process. And then finally, continue to archive and compress the databases to reduce the size and scope. I'll mention one other thing that got us at the very, very end. Our final move group that occurred in February, which was our final large set of systems, we had to move to more of a dedicated express route, so to kind of deal with our network traffic as we were monitoring that. And so I think really evaluating your network traffic and working with your network engineers to understand not only what you see today, but what you expect as you move to the cloud is important. And that's something we kind of had to change midstream that we hadn't planned on because we kind of were leveraging a shared instance of express route before. So,
Mike, obviously there's a lot of variables there, but a lot of this is more like a traditional system as far as planning for things like networking and just performance on systems. Even with the automation helping, you can't just forget about some of the basics, I guess.
Yes, exactly, and there's just a lot of coordination that you have to do, and make sure you bring in the right people and the knowledgeable people. I want to say our success, more than the automation, the technology, and the tools that we leveraged, it was about the coordination across the multiple groups and making sure we understood everything from other systems that we didn't own to systems that were bolt-on that we needed to work with SAP, to our network, and making sure we understood how that interacted with SAP and how that profile will change as in the process of moving to Azure, and then once we fully get to Azure. And so it just required, like any, I think, large-scale enterprise-type project, a broad set of people to be part of that core team to make sure that we were not forgetting anything in the mix.
I know you certainly didn't get any barriers removed from a security and compliance, and you made that work. There was a question that I had after looking at that poll, and I think you probably know what the question I'm going to ask is. We made a decision on S/4HANA, and I'm sure most of the people on the phone want to know what the decision process was for Microsoft going with S/4HANA.
Yeah, and so great question, and I probably get this second most after, are we fully on Azure? So, we view S/4HANA as an opportunity and a kind of a lightning rod to really migrate us towards the digital transformation as a corporation. I think S/4HANA provides two key components for us that we understand today, and we're in the process of working with the business to uncover more benefits. Number one, remember, we have a 25-year-old SAP system from which decisions we made years and years and years ago were based on a business that has transformed into a brand new business today. We didn't even have the concept of consumption to cash. We sold box product and mice, and it was a completely different business. And so the migration to S4 allows us to go back and adjust and make decisions that fit our business more effectively today. And so, one of the focus areas for us, even though we're in a single instance, we are moving to central finance, focusing on kind of our code block and making sure we start from the end and work our way backwards of how do we want to manage our financials as a corporation in this new business that we're in today. And so it's really an opportunity for us to not only correct kind of decisions made in the past, but also look at how we do business and how we want to transform that business digitally so that we can be more effective as a corporation. So we see that as one of the key elements. The second key element is the ability to, leverage HANA and leverage, the application to actually see insights, really make better, faster decisions. One of the keys that I think what we saw within CSC, and I think our board saw, or our senior leadership team saw, was, that put a fast in-memory solution and S4's product into Azure, and then tie in all of the AI capabilities, machine learning capabilities. There's a lot of opportunity to not only get data quicker, but understand nuances of that data and really help us, transform the business. And so those are things we're starting to try and uncover as we're in the process of starting to build out our S4 landscape and work with the business moving forward. So it's an exciting time. We're at the very early stages of S4. I will note our S4 sandbox systems, we have 2 of them today that we're working with the business on, are in Azure as well. So our plan is our S4 instances will be completely in Azure right from the start. That's a new set of landscapes for us than the old NetWeaver stack. So we're building out standards and automation and working with the product team in that space as well. And so, one of the I was just going to say, we've got a number of presentations at Sapphire this year, not only talking about our Azure journey, but also our S4 efforts that are underway. I'm actually talking with the CIO of SAP at one of the presentations, and we're kind of talking about both of our shared instances of not only moving to Azure, but also moving to S4.
Fantastic. I really want to thank you for going through that, Mike. It was a truly great experience from Microsoft, and I know we learned a lot that we can now share with our customers, and they're going to benefit from what we've learned during the migration and as you continue to update that experience for us. I think, why don't we get to another poll question to learn some of the key blockers that you folks may have encountered or are facing now, so when you move to the cloud. Steve, can you lead us through the next poll question, please?
Sure. Very good. Thanks, gentlemen. Our second poll question, we'd just like to know what is or was the biggest blocker for your organization in moving to the cloud? Was it that you were still under contract with our cloud provider? You had concern over security and compliance? Or there was concern over license portability on products already in use? So please select any of these 3 options, and we'll provide the responses in a moment. Just again, want to remind our audience that we do have a number of questions already in the queue for our Q&A session. Feel free to submit them. If we don't get to them during the live session, someone will follow up with you over the next few business days, so we will get to your questions. Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks. So can we go ahead and see those poll results?
Sure. Let's take a look. Just a couple more coming in last minute here. And so...
And I know we see it from a lot of customers, Steve, as well. Oh, there you go. I'm sorry.
Well, we got about 2/3 are saying concern over the security and compliance issue.
Okay. I think that's something that I've heard from a number of customers, and I know we're going to address it when I talk about some of the other customers that we've gone through. And so from that, let's go ahead and move on then and talk through, how other customers were dealing with the security and compliance. It's less people than I thought that were actually another cloud provider or under contract. In our case, obviously, we have a lot of migration to Azure, but some customers do have, I know, some existing contracts with outsourcers. The license portability doesn't shock me. We'll talk through how some customers also have helped deal with that issue as well. And so I'll go ahead and talk about the ability to go through here for a few of the customers onto the cloud. I want to talk about a typical journey that we go through, and then I'm going to get into some specific customer examples. And from this slide here, we're going to go through and talk through the scenarios that are here. One of the scenarios that we talk about for customers is we know some of the customers aren't necessarily moving to S4. From the poll we see, even if you are moving, it may be over 12 months. the cloud still offers a lot of great capability. In fact, when Mike was talking about Microsoft IT, you absolutely see on that journey for Microsoft IT, a lot of our systems were traditional NetWeaver systems that we moved, or some of the new systems that SAP has rolled out for their services. And, the thought process around this is we're supporting all of those scenarios. So, when we talk about the traditional move, there's some great capability not only to move, but then talk about how you can try going to Azure. So, the first thing that we talk about here is SAP on any database and running that on the Azure cloud and taking advantage of the hyperscale cloud. We talk about running SAP and doing a move from NEDB to HANA. And then that final evolution, really by 2025, getting customers to that journey, running full S4 and SAP HANA. And so, from that journey, I think, those are the typical processes that we talk through and typically what we run through when the customers are on that journey. I think as we go through this, this process and the journey that we're going through, it's led a lot of customers to talk about how they actually run their migration. And so I'm going to go ahead and go into the customer stories, which is really the heart of what I wanted to share here today. The first story I'm going to talk about is a customer I've been working with for some time now around really talking about what the advantages are for the move to the cloud. And, I think the transformation story Mike talked about is really essential. A lot of the customers that are running SAP aren't necessarily greenfield. We do have a few of those. In fact, I'll talk about one of those customers next and how they're doing a greenfield deployment. But a lot of these customers have been running for quite some time, and they need to make this transformation for new agility of business services. Security and compliance is what I'm going to talk about here because those requirements are changing quite rapidly, and we're finding people are actually leveraging the cloud to actually become more secure or compliant. And really the transformation around industry solutions, leveraging things like big data. So on this consumer goods company example, when we really talk about the business case for moving, as the customer had looked at their environment, one of the things that they observed is Business Intelligence Accelerator was going past sunset. They were going to roll out HANA for BW, and they were worried about really the stories about, how fast this grows, and if they go on the appliance model, how many of them do they have to replace and how fast, and really, how does that cost model impact them? Their costs were already increasing as they're starting to go through these transformations because, for a period of time, you're side by side, but just the growth alone for a lot of customers is increasing that cost. And then they had a lot of cost on the non-prod systems that they really had heard stories, like in this case from Microsoft, around how we were able to snooze the systems that were non-production to really save a lot of the cost around those systems. What drove the initial pull of this customer to move was actually from the business talking about doing things like trade promotion, management improvement, looking at things like SKU cannibalization. Just like at Microsoft where we have a huge big data store, most of the reporting that we get to transform the business includes information from SAP, maybe cost data or supply data, and then merging that together with big data, demographic data, or looking at some of the data sources that are available that will have machine learning in them to look at things like SKU cannibalization. In the consumer goods space, this would be where your own products are designed from a planogram to go into a store, but you don't really have the ability to go down to a single SKU to a single store to see the variances. So you might just go down to a city. And, by using the power of Azure and machine learning, this customer was able to rapidly show that they can actually go down to a specific SKU to a specific store. And, there's a lot of advantage then to seeing how you optimize that to make sure you don't get stock out incidents in your stocking product that people are actually going to buy. Even helping increase margin there in some areas where the higher demographics, where people aren't as cost sensitive. And then being very cost sensitive in the areas where there were lower social demographics or income demographics around that where they knew that was driving behavior. And obviously, just looking at things like, the temperature, right, as a variance for logistics and what products were going just by temperature. And so, that drove this initial migration. When they actually started doing the move, the systems were not small. So in this case, Microsoft has some very large systems. As you know, though, we're in the earlier processes of running HANA. And so for this customer, the move of their system was over 20 terabytes on their HANA BW system. and that was once it's on HANA. So this is an EDW and BW system that's very large. And so as we looked at that, their migration window was quite small. And so, one of the thoughts that we had on that is, how do you leverage the power of the cloud and some of the techniques that are in HANA, for instance, HANA system replication, to maintain a very small migration window. With a traditional migration, you might do something like an import-export, like we did for our ECC system in Microsoft. And in this case, we're able to leverage HANA system replication as well. We could do an asynchronous replication, and then their downtime is really just that final sync, and then the validations that, of course, everyone runs to make sure things are secure. As part of this process, one thing that was essential to them was to be able to leverage things like single sign-on. Like most customers that I talk to, they're running Office 365 and already using Azure Active Directory. They wanted to use that as an authentication mechanism to be able to use, in this case, SAML. Some of my customers also use Kerberos under the covers to really do the single sign-on. And like Microsoft, what they're finding is our ability in the cloud to keep up with compliance and certifications really helped them use that, plus the automation, to reduce their cost matrix on going ahead and maintaining the new compliances that were just added to the pile. It isn't like they got more resources to really help on this area. They had to use their existing resources. And with GDPR coming up and other compliances that they were worried about, we really gave them a roadmap to talk about how they can leverage just the base infrastructure that we provide in the Azure Active Directory to really secure the systems. If you go to Azure Trust Center, you're going to see that the amount of detail that we put into thinking through the security and compliance has been quite extensive. And this has been a key focus for us. As you know, in Azure, over $1 billion a year investment around security. And this is something that, you hear from Satya and our CEO consistently say that it's a continued investment we have around making sure that we're going ahead and continuing to maintain systems in a secure fashion with new threats that are coming out there. The other thing that we find in the SAP world is most customers' existing systems, they didn't think about things like, transparent data encryption or encryption of storage at all times, because back when you built the data center, it probably wasn't a priority. So, going to the cloud gives you the advantage not just to take advantage of these built-in services, but really to rethink how you secure your systems. Can you make sure that you put systems in place where the administrators even don't have access by default, to go ahead and look at data in the systems? And, are you looking at things that are included in the platform, like just-in-time access or just-enough access, to really make sure as the audits get more advanced for the compliancy side that you're going to pass those compliancies as they move forward, because they're not going to stay static. Again, GDPR probably one of the easiest examples to look at, and for this consumer goods customer, very, very important. I think the other thing that shocked the customer is in the past they talk about a longer migration cycle, and surely you saw in the Microsoft IT about a year to scale that up from the systems. Again, a very complex architecture. Because of the processes that we learned from that, we've talked about, from the envisioning of this to the first systems going live for the non-prod in just weeks in these large-scale systems. And, the final process of this, we're talking about just months, a few months to go ahead and migrate the entire system so they didn't have dual costs for a long period of time, made it very cost-effective to migrate. I think for this particular customer, they look at their growth path, and one of their concerns is they know the hardware is changing pretty rapidly and HANA is evolving pretty rapidly. So, how do they have the ability to make sure they're sizing right and can continue that growth path without having to really rebuy entire solutions? And, here we talk about our SKU up in the very largest systems or in our virtual machines being able to resize those, right? And on the virtual machines, I can size up or down on those machines and give myself a lot of flexibility and agility to make sure I provide the right capacity at the right time for what's going on. And so, again, this was a very important conversation that we talked about. I think it's also interesting that, as they look at the evolution from their traditional NetWeaver and moving, things like to S4 and simplified finance, it gave them a test bed to really say that these systems aren't going to run 7x24. But in this case, they really liked the idea that they could bring these systems up, let the business test on them, and when they weren't using them sometimes for a few weeks at a time, they could shut those systems down and just pay storage costs, which is minimal. And then when they have new functionality implemented or, there's a new release they can try as they're moving to S4HANA, they can just bring those systems up and they don't have to pay the full cost till they do the migration. So that was really great. In this particular case, they were on a private hosting provider. And, I think one of the things that they thought is they were very cost effective because they had a longer term contract originally. And in this case, they found two things that really happened, which are pretty common. On the NetWeaver environment, the changes didn't happen quite as fast. But on the HANA environment, as the product evolves, a lot of people started with things like half-terabyte nodes. And, not only do they see some performance lag in that, but in this case, an overall cost savings by using the scale of Azure. They also loved the fact when we were talking to them that the size of the systems went really large. They were a little shocked, in fact, that it was larger than the systems they were talking about with the private hosting provider. And we have customers, again, running our largest systems. So you can see on the HANA IaaS directory, we have single nodes up to 20 terabytes. And our scale-out solution is now really allowing customers to go to very, very large systems. In this case, they wanted a model to know that if they grew to 100 terabytes, they'd actually be able to support it. And they were very comfortable with our roadmap around how to do that and not need as many systems and continue to stay cost-effective. I think the other change that was significant for them is just, the agility. How do you go from, 6 weeks and making business changes and, trying capability or trying an enhancement pack and moving that to just days, right? Because you do replicas of the system much easier. We not only have the ability to support traditional things like snapshotting of systems for our large instances, but just the ability to spin up a smaller system, for instance, to do more trial of capability meant that they could do faster upgrades around enhancements that the business thought was critical. So rather than doing ancillary solutions where they were looking at best of breed where the costs were getting out of control, the idea here is to save on the interfaces that were happening. So those features they already own and paid for, or when a new enhancement comes out from SAP, again, they can move very rapidly. So they're very pleased, I think, with the ability to move forward and leverage that capability that they had. I think, and the second area here was really a healthcare company, and this is one of my favorite examples because when I started having this conversation, one of the conversations that we had was really about the compliances and uniqueness on things like HIPAA and high tech, and how when we started, they didn't think that they would be able to move that to a public cloud, and even for non-prod systems, they were concerned. And here again, by looking at just the information there on customers that have already moved in the healthcare space, or being able to look at the ability to leverage a lot of the content and services that we had that were compliant already, they rapidly found that it was much easier to use Azure to maintain these compliances. So in this case, their S4 wasn't a traditional implementation because they did have information there that fell into the healthcare roles around making sure that that was secure. They also had, in their case, the big data requirement that, they had to make sure that they could actually remove PII information and health information in some of the machine learning that they were doing. So things like data masking were really of interest to them, and the big data space was really interesting to them on that business growth. For their side, that gives them the ability to improve their life cycle as well as to leverage the data that they're collecting that they've had for a long time that they never monetized. So a new business case really for them to leverage that. Their complexity of landscapes, because they had a slower time to evolve in their traditional environment, were really problematic for them. And so in this case, they actually went a greenfield implementation of S4, and they had many different systems that they were migrating from as they grew over time and had a bunch of acquisitions over time. And so that was great for them. As they went through their compliance, they were able to show they were not putting anything at risk in their move to Azure. The deployment and testing was an area they really loved, the automation and the experiences we were able to show them on how they can actually leverage that effectively. In fact, when we first started talking to them and they were looking at S4, we actually put a system up the same day we talked to them for them to start trying that. And so they thought that was great for a trial. Like every customer, they realized they would need to make their own modifications for their own footprint of SAP. And so they were very happy to see they could use a lot of the information and automation on things like GitHub for Azure so they could actually get a completely customized version of the deployment. Again, not customizing the SAP system, but the deployment templates and everything else were very central to kind of how they run their systems. And that's pretty typical. I mean, all of the cloud providers talk about these generic quick start systems, right? But in the end, you usually have some specific things you'll do either for compliancy or the images that you're going to use to create these. And so you can replicate these and leverage the systems. Here are the things that we include in the artificial intelligence in the platform. Things like Security Advisor were really critical to them to show that their systems can maintain the security moving forward. They didn't want any exposure to see that, as they move forward, their data was breached. And so they wanted to leverage every edge that we had. And, our cybersecurity team and investments we have working with Security Center were really key to them. So we went in detail in talking about how we worry about penetration testing and, how do we provide protection at the edge and inside the systems, right? Secure at all times, encrypted at all times, and transit at rest. And, by default, being able to do that for their systems, including HANA, really, really key to them. They not only went for the SAP HANA route, but in this case, leveraging a lot of the BW content that was there, especially for consolidations. And so they were leveraging, again, a complete greenfield with a best-of-breed kind of SAP implementation, leveraging the different services available to them. In this first implementation, they've already got data integrated in AI and machine learning. They already had an Azure Data Lake store, and they found it was so easy to integrate that data. We do support hybrid environments for on-premise, but one of the big advantages they had when they actually moved their SAP system is data gravity. That all the data that they were leveraging was within Azure. And, if you look at the IDC report talking about the leveraging of things like Azure Data Lake Store versus a traditional Hadoop cluster, it showed a significant savings for them, over $200,000 per terabyte over 5 years. And when you look at their data store growth, they're looking at petabytes of data. So for them, being able to leverage just the native services in Azure in a secure fashion was really, really critical. Once again, you see also things like single sign-on and using Azure Active Directory, which is off-the-shelf capable for any of the SAP functions. Again, whether that's traditional NetWeaver or whether that's S4, or the new cloud services like Ariba, SuccessFactors, Hybris, right, being able to leverage that single sign-on experience. For them, it wasn't just about their integration, but their partners and their customers that they actually work with, their distributors, being able to let them use their Active Directory to come in and the B2B capabilities we had there. So they are no longer managing usernames and passwords for the external parties. This is a feature they couldn't do on-premise, but it was really easy to do for these parties that they were pulling in. One of the things they liked most about this was they were able to leverage the customers' Active Directories that they had in place. And in this case, all of their initial customers were already migrated due to leveraging things like Office 365. So they didn't have to actually spend a lot of time with customers talking about it. They were able just to implement. And with our huge implementations that we've done of Office 365, you might find you're in the same situation where all of your customers are already there to leverage and simply leverage that to again, not get yourself more exposure than you need. In the new world, managing as few usernames and passwords is probably the best policy. And they also invoked, in this case, the multi-factor authentication. So using Authenticator in Microsoft's world, we have the ability to run that on iOS or Android. And so in this case, any of the critical transactions always requiring that they have that third authentication mechanism beyond just a username and password. Again, really key for them. So that's, a couple of customers that I wanted to kind of refresh the stories and kind of what was driving them to Azure. Again, at Sapphire, we're going to be talking about a lot of customers, and you'll hear from the customers themselves at Sapphire. Due to the timing here, we just wanted to go through a few of the stories. I think the other thing that's important, if you go into the SAP on Azure on our Azure website, you'll see a lot of the customer case studies and stories from the customers themselves. And if you look at some of the other webcasts that we've done, again, this is part 3, you'll hear about those journeys, and you'll hear about the ability to go ahead and look at some of the stories that are there that we talked about in the first 2 parts of this series. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over. I know we have a number of questions that might be here. I'm going to go ahead and recap why we believe Microsoft is the right answer for you. I think, by default, if you think about the data and analytics, the default tool for SAP, I still hear today, and from the third parties, showing quite a bit of Excel adoption. The number 2 tool we see with our mass adoption of Power BI is really leveraging Power BI. And using that with things like our machine learning and our AI, just being able to directly integrate that, and huge investments we're making to integrate both NetWeaver, BW, and SAP HANA, giving you better insights is really key. When you think about the single sign-on, we're the only vendor off the shelf that does single sign-on with SAP in a hyperscale cloud using our SSO, Active Directory in this case, as a service, as well as you could use your on-premise version if that's what you have, to support the latest security standards and look at the compliancy that we improve and include. And for the mission-critical systems here, if you look at the enforcement we have around how we're protecting you and around the compliancy, it is really unique in talking about how we take credibility for our back-end services and maintaining that. Again, you have responsibilities in that too, so I want to be clear. That doesn't mean we're taking on all of the compliancy, right? But we're very clear around what pieces on roles, responsibilities we own and you own in that process. If you think about our DNA as a company, it's all about leveraging these enterprise systems. You know, that's really the thing Microsoft does best. And with our partner ecosystem and the support ecosystem for mission critical, it is absolutely unique for SAP. You know, we don't just talk about our data centers having an SLA, but we talk about your individual system. You're running SAP HANA. We have systems that were custom designed to run SAP HANA in virtual machines as well as bare metal. And those systems have a single system SLA because they're not just generic VMs or machines that we put in place, but they were specifically designed to run SAP with our type partnership. That is absolutely unique and leads me into that fourth point about where we're at with our partnership and really where we're continuing to do joint engineering. And, of course, talked about the high availability and business continuity, again, the only one of its kind in the hyperscale space, providing that level of capability. So with that, I'm going to leave the slide up as we go through, but what I really wanted to do in the time here is take a few questions that we might have out there. So, Naga or Steve, do you have any questions that we want to take?
Okay, thanks very much. Excellent presentation. We do have a couple of questions. Before we do, I just wanted to remind our audience of a couple things. We do have our series of events coming up that have already happened, so you can watch them on demand, and I'll push out a link to our audience so that they can register and check out the previous events in our series. Also want to push out a link to our feedback survey for our audience and get some feedback on what they thought of this event and our series as well. Quick question here from Kevin, who wanted to know, can you discuss the need for different license types for on-prem versus cloud installations?
Yeah, so for the different license types, I think it becomes pretty clear that the biggest hurdle people run into is not necessarily the SAP licenses, but the big hurdle boils down to generally the database licenses. And this is an area where, you know, like for Microsoft, if you have software assurance, you have license portability with the database. I think the challenge comes in where people had other databases, and in that case, you need to check with your database vendor. I will tell you we have specific programs, both with SAP to do migrations, in their case to MaxDB or into Sybase very cost effectively, and we do to SQL. In fact, we've seen a huge uptick in our SQL adoption, not because we're actually marketing it. We know everyone's going to go to HANA, but in a temporary time period, if I look at the poll that we had, the very first one, about how fast you're moving to HANA, you know, for those customers that are ready to go, you should use HANA as your database and just do the migration, right? That's a process that we could do either one step or two step, depending on what your systems look like, but pretty straightforward. And so if you're not ready for HANA on the SQL side, I think what we talk about there is really just being able to leverage that if you don't have license portability. And until you get to the HANA side, we've done over tens of thousands of migrations in our time of running SAP becomes very effective. But the word you're looking for is license portability, and that's the key factor to determine if you need to worry about license types. I will say the newer offerings coming out are almost all set to be really provide either subscription-based licensing or provide license portability. This is generally the legacy systems that you worry about, in database being the number one system to be of concern here.
Okay, thanks very much. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this session. So if we didn't get to your question during our broadcast, someone will follow up with you in the next few business days. And again, we want to remind you about some information, follow-up information. You can see that here before you. We want to thank you all for attending today's webinar, SAP Customers' Perspectives on Moving SAP Systems to the Cloud, hosted by SAP Insider and presented by Microsoft. Shortly after this live event, we're going to send you an email reminder so you can access this presentation on demand. And on behalf of our guests, Mark Skug, Worldwide Director of SAP with Microsoft, and Mike Taylor, GM Enterprise Application Services with Microsoft, we want to thank you for your time and have a great day.